A small Amish farm just outside Berlin, Ohio, in the heart of Holmes County. Behind a white frame barn, an old man in his 80s walks the rows of a market garden that runs almost a quarter of an acre along the fence line. He moves slowly, leaning on the handle of a hand cultivator that has been in his family since before the Second World War. The soil between the cabbages is loose enough that his boot prints disappear behind him within an hour. The bed has not been tilled by an engine in his lifetime. There are weeds in there, yes, but you have to crouch down and hunt for them. Drive 700 miles in any direction. A subdivision in the Cleveland suburbs, a backyard on the edge of Indianapolis, a half-acre lot outside Knoxville. Watch what happens on any Saturday in May. The owner is on hands and knees with a trowel. The crabgrass is back. The dandelions are back. The thistle in the southwest corner has come up exactly where it came up last year. The herbicide bottle in the garage is half empty already, and it has been only 7 weeks since the season started. How many weekends does a person have left in a life? And how many should be given over to a battle that nobody wins? The 5 techniques here are not products. They are not sold in any catalog. Everyone is a quiet partnership with something the soil already knows how to do. And the first starts with the most counterintuitive piece of advice an experienced gardener can hear. Put the rototiller away. What does a rototiller actually do? Most gardeners would answer in one sentence. It loosens the soil so seedlings can grow. That answer is correct on the surface and almost completely wrong underneath. A rototiller breaks the soil into small pieces and turns it over. From the perspective of what is actually living in the dirt and what is dormant in it, that is something else entirely. Soil scientists at the University of Washington, led by Dr. David Montgomery, have spent the last 20 years measuring what happens to a garden bed every time it gets tilled. Dr. Montgomery wrote a book in 2017 called Growing a Revolution that pulled together the data from farms and home gardens on every inhabited continent. His central finding is hard to argue with. Every pass of a tiller, even a small electric one, breaks apart the network of fungal threads that hold soil structure together and brings dormant weed seeds back to the surface where they can germinate. Both of those things hurt the gardener. The combination is catastrophic over time. Consider just the seeds. Researchers at Michigan State University documented years ago that a single square foot of typical American garden soil holds anywhere from about 50 viable weed seeds at the low end to almost 15,000 at the high end. 15,000. Imagine a patch of dirt the size of a dinner plate, and imagine 15,000 crabgrass and lamb's quarter and pigweed seeds packed into that single patch like grit in a sack. They have been waiting there, often for years, sometimes for decades. Velvet leaf has been documented coming up after sitting underground for over 50 years, untouched, in total darkness. Those seeds need almost nothing to germinate. A bit of moisture is usually already present. The one missing ingredient is sunlight, even just a flash of it. When the tiller blade slices through the bed in April, it pulls those seeds up to the surface and gives them exactly the light they have been patiently waiting for. The gardener is, in effect, opening a bank vault of dormant weeds and inviting them all to the party. The second injury is harder to see. Healthy soil is held together by an underground network of fungal threads, the way an old hand-stitched quilt is held together by thousands of nearly invisible stitches. Cut one stitch, and the quilt stays mostly together. Cut hundreds, and the whole thing comes apart in your hands. A rototiller cuts hundreds. The fungal threads, called hyphae, are part of a community of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that connect directly to plant roots and extend the root's reach by a factor of 10 or 20. Cut the fungi and the plants suddenly cannot find the water and minerals they could find easily before. Here is where most gardeners make the wrong turn. They look at their failing garden in July and conclude the soil is depleted, so they add more fertilizer. The next spring, they till even harder to mix the fertilizer in, which destroys even more of the soil biology. The bed gets worse every year, while the gardener works harder and spends more money trying to fix what the tilling itself caused. A man named Floyd, in Reno County, Kansas, told me once that he had spent 40 years tilling his garden every spring and another 15 years not tilling it. The 40-year version, he said, had been a constant fight. The 15-year version had been a friendship. The Amish gardeners in Holmes County and the Old Order Mennonites around Big Valley, Pennsylvania, made this decision generations ago. The plow, in some communities, was the symbol of progress that they declined to follow. Hand cultivators, broad forks, and surface mulching took its place. The result, after several decades, is the kind of bed in which the soil between rows is so loose that a hand can be pushed in past the wrist without resistance. Weeds are rare, and the same plot produces year after year without the spring exhaustion that defeats so many backyard growers. There is no product on a hardware store shelf to replace tilling. There never could be. The market does not sell the act of leaving the soil alone. It sells the act of doing things to it, which is part of why the multi-billion-dollar tiller and herbicide industries exist in the first place, and why the no-till method has been almost invisible in mainstream gardening media for 60 years. But putting the tiller away leaves a real question. How does a new bed actually get started? How does a weedy patch of lawn become a productive garden plot without machinery, without poison, and without the bending and pulling that wrecks so many gardeners' backs? The answer is older than the rototiller, older than the lawnmower, and almost embarrassingly cheap. It is a single packet of seed that costs about $3 at the farm supply store. What if there were a single fast-growing plant that scattered across a weed-choked patch of ground in June and left alone for 40 days, would smother almost every weed underneath it, attract bees by the hundreds, soften the soil, and then surrender quietly to the next frost without any work from the gardener at all? That plant is buckwheat. It is not wheat. It is not even a grass. Buckwheat is a fast-growing, flowering plant in the same family as rhubarb and sorrel, and it has been used in Central and Northern Europe as a smother crop for at least 400 years. The German Pennsylvania Dutch brought the practice to America in the late 1600s. Some of the oldest Amish gardens in the country still have annual buckwheat patches that have been in continuous rotation for over 2 centuries. Researchers at Cornell University, led by Dr. Thomas Björkman, have spent decades documenting exactly how buckwheat works as a weed suppressant. His central finding is that buckwheat, planted thickly on bare soil, can germinate in 3 to 5 days, reach 1.5 feet tall in 3 weeks, and put on a dense canopy of broad green leaves that blocks 90 to 95% of the sunlight reaching the ground below. Weeds underneath simply do not have the light to compete. The few that do break through tend to be straggly, stretched, and easy to pull. Buckwheat does the work for you. The mechanism is twofold. First, the canopy itself blocks the light, the way a green parasol shades the seat underneath it. Second, the buckwheat's fibrous root system fills the top 3 to 4 inches of soil so densely that there is almost no room for weed roots to establish. Here is the practical method that turns this from theory into a working tool in the home garden. Take a patch of ground that has gone to weeds, whether it is an old vegetable bed that got away from you in July, a brand new garden plot in unbroken sod, or the corner behind the tool shed that has been a thistle nursery for 6 years. Scrape off any large existing weeds with a sharp hoe. Do not till. Rake the surface roughly. Scatter buckwheat seed at about 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet, roughly 4 heaping tablespoons per 10 square feet. Rake the seed in lightly. Water once if there is no rain in the forecast. In 3 days, the buckwheat is up. In 2 weeks, it is shoulder high to a beagle. In 4 to 5 weeks, it is in full bloom, covered in small white flowers that hum with honeybees all day long. A neighbor of mine in northern Indiana keeps 4 hives near her vegetable garden and plants a 1/4 acre of buckwheat every July, just to keep them happy in the gap between the basswood bloom and the goldenrod. She says her honey has a darker, almost molasses-like flavor in the buckwheat year. Her bees do not mind. The mistake almost every first-time grower makes with buckwheat is letting it go to seed. Buckwheat sets viable seed about 10 days after it begins to flower. If you let it stand past that point, you will have buckwheat volunteers coming up in your garden for the next 2 or 3 seasons. The window for termination is narrow but obvious. As soon as the field is in full bloom, knock it down. A scythe works. A string trimmer works. Even a sharp lawnmower set high will do it. Leave the cut tops lying on the soil surface as mulch. Within 2 weeks, the residue is broken down to a soft brown crust that holds moisture and continues to suppress weeds. 2 to 3 rounds of buckwheat in a single summer can clean up a weedy plot completely. A patch that grew nothing but pigweed in July of one year can grow vegetables cleanly the following May. There is no spray, there is no pull. The buckwheat does it. One more detail worth knowing. Buckwheat pulls phosphorus up from deeper soil layers and concentrates it in its tops. When the plants are mowed and the residue decomposes, that phosphorus becomes available at the surface, exactly where the next crop's roots will find it. Free fertilizer, delivered as part of the weed control. The fertilizer aisle at the hardware store cannot compete with $3 of buckwheat seed. The plant does the entire job. What if every planting hole, instead of being just a hole, were a tiny long-term water reservoir, a slow-release nutrient bank, and a fungal nursery, all in one? And what if you could build that into every hole on planting day using nothing more than a chunk of rotting wood from the back of the property? The technique is called Hügelkultur, which is the German word for mound culture, and it has been used in the German-speaking parts of Europe since at least the 17th century. Bavarian and Black Forest farmers built whole garden beds on top of buried logs and brush piles. Their Pennsylvania Dutch descendants brought the smaller-scale version with them to Lancaster County and the Big Valley region of Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. The Austrian permaculturist Sepp Holzer, working on his family farm in the Salzburg Mountains starting in the late 1960s, brought the practice back into modern attention. His book, Sepp Holzer's Permaculture, published in English in 2010, made the buried wood method into something half the homesteading movement in America has heard of in the last 15 years. But the home garden version, the planting hole version, has been quietly used by Amish growers for as long as anyone can remember. It is a fraction of the work of building a full Hügelkultur mound, and it transforms what each individual plant has access to in the soil. Here is the simple version. When you dig a planting hole for a tomato, a pepper, a squash, or any other thirsty annual, dig the hole 1 shovel blade deeper than you normally would. At the bottom of that deeper hole, place a single piece of well-rotted hardwood, a chunk of an old oak limb that has been lying in the woodlot for 5 years, a section of a fallen maple branch that has gone soft, a piece of half-rotten apple wood from last season's pruning pile, anything that has begun to break down and has started to feel a little spongy under the fingers. The piece should be about the size of a brick, somewhere around 6 inches long and 2 or 3 inches across. Set it horizontally at the bottom of the hole. Cover it with 3 inches of soil, then plant your transplant on top in the normal way. What that single piece of buried wood does over the next 3 to 5 years is extraordinary. As the wood slowly decomposes, it absorbs water like a sponge and releases it gradually back into the surrounding soil. Studies on Sepp Holzer's farm and on similar plots in northeastern Europe have measured that buried wood beds need somewhere between 30 and 50% less irrigation than comparable beds without the wood. In drought years, the difference is the difference between a crop and no crop. The wood also becomes a nursery for the fungi that no garden can do without. Saprophytic fungi colonize the rotting wood within weeks, and from there, send hyphae out into the surrounding soil. Mycorrhizal fungi follow. Within a single growing season, the planting hole is networked into the larger soil biology in a way that an unprepared hole simply is not. Here is where most well-meaning gardeners go wrong. They use the wrong wood. Fresh, undecayed wood, the kind cut off a live tree last weekend and still pale yellow inside, will not work. Fresh wood actually consumes nitrogen as it decomposes, pulling it out of the surrounding soil and starving the plant on top for the first season. The piece of wood has to be already breaking down. If you can crumble a corner of it between your fingers with mild pressure, it is ready. If you cannot, set it aside in the woodlot for another 2 or 3 years and use something older. Avoid black walnut, butternut, and any softwood that still smells strongly of pine resin. Walnut and butternut both release a compound called juglone that kills tomatoes, peppers, and most nightshades within a few weeks. An Amish gardener named Eli in Holmes County, Ohio, told me his grandfather once lost an entire row of heirloom tomatoes to a single buried walnut log that nobody realized had been added to the bed. They learned the rule the hard way and never broke it again. Oak, maple, hickory, beech, apple, cherry, any well-decayed hardwood will work beautifully. A single 5-pound chunk of soft, half-rotted hardwood buried under each tomato plant at transplanting time can carry that plant through 3 weeks of drought without supplemental water and feed it slowly for years. There is no product in any garden catalog that does what a rotten chunk of oak does. The catalog does not stock fallen logs. But even with the planting hole prepared and the buckwheat clearing the bed, what about the gap year? What about the long stretch when one crop is gone and the next has not yet been planted, when the soil is most vulnerable and the weeds rush in to claim the territory? That is when the most powerful tool in the no-till toolkit comes out, and it works through chemistry that goes back to the same compounds that give mustard, horseradish, and wasabi their kick. What if there were a single fall planting, scattered across a finished vegetable bed in early September, that did 6 things at once? It feeds the soil. It fixes free nitrogen from the air. It mines deep minerals up to the surface. It produces enough biomass to mulch the bed all winter. It releases a natural soil fumigant that kills weed seeds, soil pests, and several disease pathogens. And it asks nothing from the gardener after the day the seed gets scattered. That mixture exists. It is called a multi-species cover crop cocktail, and it has been used in various forms by traditional plain growers for generations. Formally studied by USDA researchers since the 1990s, and refined into precise seed blends by no-till farmers like Gabe Brown in North Dakota and Ray Archuleta in Missouri. The home garden version costs about $10 in seed and covers a 400 square foot bed. 5 components, each playing a specific job. First, yellow mustard. The same Sinapis alba whose seeds get ground into the yellow mustard that goes on hot dogs. Mustard plants accumulate compounds in their tissue called glucosinolates, and when those tissues are chopped and mixed into the soil, the glucosinolates break down into isothiocyanates, the same fiery compounds that give horseradish and wasabi their kick. In the soil, those isothiocyanates act as a natural fumigant. They kill weed seeds within reach. They suppress soil-borne fungal diseases like verticillium and fusarium wilt. They reduce nematode populations by anywhere from 60 to 90%. The leading researcher on what is now called biofumigation is Dr. Matt Mora at the University of Idaho, who has spent over 30 years measuring exactly which mustard varieties produce the highest glucosinolate concentrations and how to incorporate them for maximum effect. His findings have been used by organic potato growers across the Pacific Northwest to control wireworms and verticillium without a single pound of synthetic fumigant. Second, oats. Common forage oats grow fast in cool weather, put on enormous biomass in 8 to 10 weeks, and winter kill in any climate where the temperature drops below about 20 degrees Fahrenheit for several consecutive nights. The dead oat residue forms a thick mulch that smothers weeds straight through the following spring. Third, crimson clover, a nitrogen-fixing legume that adds anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre to the soil, converted directly from atmospheric nitrogen through a symbiotic relationship with rhizobium bacteria in its root nodules. Crimson clover is hardy enough to survive most southern and mid-Atlantic winters and dies back in spring just before vegetable planting season, delivering its nitrogen to whatever crop comes next. Fourth, Austrian winter peas, another nitrogen fixer with softer biomass than the clover and rich enough in nitrogen that the residue breaks down within just a few weeks of being chopped. Austrian peas pair perfectly with crimson clover, providing nitrogen on 2 different timetables. Fifth, forage turnip. Like a milder cousin of the tillage radish, the forage turnip drives a moderate taproot down through compacted subsoil, opens drainage channels, mines minerals from below, and complements the mustard rather than competing with it. All 5 seeds get mixed together and scattered evenly across the bed in late August or early September. Rake lightly. Water once if dry. The cocktail does the rest. By mid-October, the bed is a riot of color. Yellow mustard flowers, crimson clover blossoms, oat seed heads, white pea flowers, and dark green turnip tops, all knitted together into a dense living mat that no weed can punch through. By December, the oats and peas have winter killed. By March, the clover is regreening and the mustard residue is breaking down. About 3 weeks before vegetable transplanting time, the surviving green growth gets chopped at the base, lightly mixed into the top 2 inches of soil with a hand cultivator, not a tiller, and left to release its compounds. Here is where one of the most common pieces of internet gardening advice falls apart, and it is worth correcting because the myth has been circulating in Facebook groups and YouTube comment sections for at least a decade. The myth goes like this: cover crops rob the soil of nitrogen, so you cannot plant vegetables right after them, or your crops will starve. It is half true at best, and the half that is true does not apply to the multi-species cocktail at all. Yes, a high-carbon cover crop like mature cereal rye, allowed to go to seed before termination, can briefly tie up some soil nitrogen as it decomposes. But a cocktail that includes legumes, crimson clover and winter peas, is the opposite. It adds net nitrogen, and even if the mix were pure grass, waiting 2 to 3 weeks after termination before transplanting resolves any temporary tie-up completely. The myth has caused a generation of cautious gardeners to skip cover crops entirely and stay locked into bare winter beds and bagged chemical fertilizer. The mistake almost every first-time cocktail grower makes is planting too late. The seeds need at least 6 weeks of growing time before the first hard frost to establish properly. Aim for late August in the upper Midwest and northern New England, the first week of September in the mid-Atlantic, mid-September in the upper South. My grandmother in eastern Pennsylvania always said she scattered her cover crop on Labor Day weekend and never missed a year. This cocktail covers the modern fall garden completely. The last method on the list is older than any cover crop, older than mustard biofumigation as a recognized practice, and predates synthetic herbicides by at least a century. Before the first commercial chemical herbicide hit the American market in 1945, there was no spray. There was no bottle. There was almost no such thing as buying weed control. Across millions of acres of American farmland, weeds were managed by something older, quieter, and considerably more effective than anything that came out of a chemistry lab. Geese. Specifically, weeder geese. A working class of domestic geese that had been bred since the 1700s in Europe and selected on American farms through most of the 1800s for one particular trait. They ate grass and broadleaf weeds with enthusiasm. They left most cultivated vegetables and woody crops alone. The USDA published a guide in 1937, Farmer's Bulletin number 1751, titled Geese in Cotton, Strawberry, Mint, and Other Crops. It documented in plain language a system already in use on tens of thousands of American farms. White Chinese geese, African geese, Emden geese, and the famously gentle pilgrim goose were the most common working breeds. A pair of mature geese could weed a 1/4 acre of cotton or strawberries cleanly through an entire growing season for nothing more than what they grazed, plus a handful of cracked corn at night. The bulletin recommended 4 to 6 geese per acre for cotton, slightly more for tighter crops like strawberries. The geese patrolled the rows at sunrise, ate the young grass and broadleaf seedlings as they emerged, and ignored the woody stems of the strawberry plants and the bitter taste of mature cotton leaves. By the time chemical herbicides like 2,4-D arrived in 1945, the weeder goose tradition was already on every major cotton farm from the Mississippi Delta to the San Joaquin Valley. Then it disappeared. Almost overnight, in agricultural terms. The herbicide salesman drove out from the county seat with cans of spray and promises. The geese got sold or eaten. The ones that survived wandered the farmyard ornamentally. By 1965, the practice was largely forgotten outside Amish, Mennonite, and a handful of Old Order communities that kept it going on the smaller scale appropriate to a home garden. For a home garden, the operation is much smaller. A single pair of friendly weeder geese, pilgrim geese are best for beginners because they are bred to be calm around people, can manage the grass and broadleaf weeds in a half-acre garden through an entire summer. They drink water from a shallow pan. They sleep in a small doghouse-sized shelter at night. They eat almost everything in the way of weed seedlings and very little of the vegetables. The mistake new owners make most often is letting the geese into the vegetable garden too early. Tomato, pepper, and squash seedlings under 6 inches are vulnerable. A goose will tear up a young tomato in 2 minutes. The traditional rule is wait until the cultivated crops are clearly taller and woodier than the surrounding weeds, then let the geese in. By midsummer, when most vegetables are well established, the geese can roam freely. The weeds get eaten. The vegetables stay untouched. One specific practical detail that old farmers swore by, and that modern animal behavior research backs them up on, is feeding the geese a small handful of cracked corn or commercial waterfowl feed once a day at the same time and same place. The geese learn the routine within 3 days and come running to that spot every evening. A retired farmer named John Yoder near Kelowna, Iowa, kept 4 pilgrim geese for over 20 years on a half-acre vegetable plot and said the only weeds he ever pulled in that time were the few inside his asparagus bed, where the geese could not safely reach the spears. The herbicide bottle in the garage does what those 4 geese did, except slower, more expensively, and at the cost of every beneficial insect, soil, microbe, and earthworm within drift distance. The geese cost about $30 a pair as goslings and live for 15 to 20 years. The math has never favored the bottle. The market has. 5 methods. Put the tiller away forever. Scatter buckwheat across the weediest corner in June and let it do the work. Bury a chunk of rotten oak at the bottom of every planting hole. Cover the fall garden with a 5-species cocktail in late August. And let 2 geese take over the rows from midsummer on. Every one of these costs almost nothing. Everyone works with what is already on the property. The woodlot, the seed packet, the fence corner, the small flock that pays for itself in goose eggs and conversation. And everyone builds the kind of bed that gets better every year instead of harder, the kind of soil a grandchild will inherit dark and crumbly and ready to grow. Next time the crabgrass comes up in the path where it has come up for 15 years running, or the thistle returns to the back corner, or the dandelions take the lawn again, pause before reaching for the bottle on the shelf at the hardware store. Walk over to the seed bin instead, or out to the pen behind the barn on a good day. The answer has almost certainly been growing or walking on the property longer than you have lived in the house. If one of these 5 sounds like the one to try first, leave a note about which one. Pass this along to a friend who has been losing the same battle for too many summers. Knowledge of how a piece of ground actually works does not survive in books. It survives because somebody on the next porch over still remembers. Happy gardening.